We're looking at Erwin, Pennsylvania for the third time. And what we're seeing here is T.M. Fowler's view of Erwin, done in 1897. Now, this is surprising in a couple of ways. First of all, this was not done from up in the air. Many people think that. I thought that at the beginning when I first saw these views. He had a team of people he would send out and make detailed maps of the whole area that he wanted to make a view of, like this. And then he would bring all this information back and work it up in his studio so that it looked like it was done from up in the air, and it wasn't. He's done these for a number of places locally. He was located in Pennsylvania, and you can find them at a lot of the local places of a certain size. What is another thing surprising about this is that in 1850, almost nothing of this stuff was here except the land and a few buildings. I'll come in and show you one of those buildings that was here. Right here, this building right here, that was John Erwin's house. He had that built in 1836. And that was his barn. Very likely they were there. And the railroad came through, and it started running in 1852, toward the end of 52. And all this stuff happened in the meantime. Just up in this little corner, you can see little things like, this is the highway, or the old turnpike going through. This was the old turnpike going through on its way to Pittsburgh. It had been there since the late 1700s. This is a railroad, the Youghiogheny Railroad, coming down. It's a branch coming off the main line. It's going down to the coal towns to bring coal in to load onto the main line at Erwin. This is Jacob Parr's wagon works. Jacob Parr was a Greensburger. He had a wagon works in Greensburg also, and he built this one out in Erwin. This is a flour mill. This is the house that I was showing you on the Fowler view. That was John Erwin's house that he had built in 1836. John Erwin had a number of enterprises going. He also had a stagecoach line running from Youngstown out to Stewartsville. And he used this place as an inn. In addition to living here, he rented space out to travelers who were going through on the Turnpike. And George Dallas Albert tells us that in the early days, starting with about 1816, there was a tavern across the street here for travelers on the pike. That's John Erwin, not to be confused with his uncle, Colonel John Erwin, who was one of the first settlers in the area and who bequeathed a lot of his land to his nephew, John Erwin. That's an earlier view of the old Erwin house on the Turnpike. The state of Pennsylvania thought enough of it to designate it as one of its historic sites along the Turnpike, the old John Erwin house. John Erwin had coal on his land, and he was also associated with the Pennsylvania Railroad. The railroad came through his land, and he was able to ship the coal out. That was the beginning of a very large operation. Westmoreland Coal Company, within a few years, became the operator, and they shipped one heck of a lot of coal out of there. You don't think of Erwin as a coal town, but that's how it started out. This is Erwin in 1860, 4 years before it was incorporated as a political entity, as the borough of Erwin Station. You can see the main feature here is the railroad coming through. What you really can't see is the railroad is blocking a view of Brush Creek. Just very slightly you can see Brush Creek on the far side of the railroad. This is Main Street in Erwin. And you can see Erwin is just starting out. And by 1864, when Erwin was incorporated, it had about 500 citizens. This is 1867. You can see the railroad going by, Brush Creek. This is Tinker Creek coming down. And it would become more or less a corridor where another railroad would be put down, going out to the other coal towns, the Youghiogheny Railroad, which was to go south to connect with the B and O. And if we go in a little bit, we might be able to see J. George. John George was one of the first people to build a house in Erwin. That's his house right there. And he was also the first person to open a store. Where you have people starting a town, you're going to have stores. And John George started the first one. At this corner out here, 5th and Main Streets, there was a duck pond once upon a time where people skated in the wintertime. 1876, you can see a town is progressing. And you can see also the agricultural roots. Here's a barn up here. Here's a barn down here. This area was once all agrarian. It was farmland. And what we're watching is a transition from an agricultural to a more or less industrial economy as the coal industry starts to get big. At one time, a huge portion of the people in Erwin were coal miners. This is looking at Erwin from up on the area that's called North Erwin. And you can see the main line going through. And here's the siding that takes off to go on the branch. That's the Tinker Run Valley or corridor taking the Youghiogheny Railroad out to the coal towns. Another interesting thing you can see here is the station. The reason you don't see Brush Creek is because the station was built on a platform right over top of Brush Creek. And that was not the best place for it because in 1903, the Oakford Park flood came down. It wiped out an awful lot in Jeanette. And when it got to Erwin, it wiped out the station, the car works that were here. This was Westmoreland Coal's car works. It just did an extreme amount of damage. The lumber mill, the sawmill that was down here got wiped out. But that was the occasion for raising the tracks. And when we meet again, we'll see that the tracks were eventually raised above the level where they had been originally. And it made it a bit safer situation. And I think that's for right now enough. And we'll say goodbye until next time when we see the number 4th one of Erwin.